What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, for me and my good friend Danny, who also happens to not really like the Outsider HBO Max series. Uh, and I talk about horror movies and streaming shows. Today, we're talking about a show that Danny does like, though, and I actually like just as much. I think we love this freaking show. Interview with the Vampire on AMC. Danny, I guess you like it more than the Outsider.
The thing with The Outsider was I had just finished the book, and then I had everything was so fresh in my head. I didn't want to just immediately relive it. And
Gotcha.
The first two episodes were a little slow.
Yeah.
I think it's Ben Mendelsohn was the lead, and he's
Yes.
good, but he's dry in the lead role. And I just had other things that I was like more into at the time. I will definitely get back to it a little bit. I just finished Holly by Stephen King.
Yeah.
And I love the character of Holly Gibney, and I know that she's in The Outsider, played by, I think, the woman who's playing Elphaba in the new Wicked.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
I think she was also nominated for an Oscar, like Cynthia Erivo, or was she Harriet in the Harriet Tubman movie?
I think yes.
Then that's an interesting casting. Very similar to the show we're talking about. Switching out the race of the characters from the books. But I love that actress, and I will get back to The Outsider, and I will watch Mr. Mercedes. Mr. Mercedes, I just put on. I watched like the opening scene, and then it was like late at night. I fell asleep, and I just was like, I'm not getting into this whole show right now. But I love the Mr. Mercedes trilogy by Stephen King, so I'll definitely get back into that and The Outsider later on.
Boom. Okay, cool. Yeah, I end up really loving The Outsider. I'm actually a big Ben Mendelsohn fan. It seems like there's a lot of really awesome Bens right now, and I could just bend over for them, including Ben Daniels as Santiago. But before we get to that, I want to talk about Mr. Roland Jones, right? Roland Jones. I haven't seen any pictures of them. I don't know details besides what's listed in their Wikipedia, but he's one of the showrunners for this show. And I really think that we got to give this person credit. Like, this show, we know the story. We know what's going to happen. And they've essentially taken this story and like elevated it. They've made it much more complex. Like, you're excited about stuff, even though you know the beats that are going to happen. You're not sitting there thinking, all right, when are we going to get to this? Oh, they're stretching this out to 2 seasons. No thoughts like that whatsoever. Before I get you started, I just want to point out Roland Jones. He was a writer on Weeds, Boardwalk Empire. I might have mentioned this before. The HBO show Perry Mason, Friday Night Lights. And he was also a Pulitzer Prize finalist for a play that he wrote, too. So that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. Of the shows you mentioned, Athena and I watched, she finished the show. I watched a couple seasons of Weeds. And I liked it until I kind of stopped liking it. But I loved Boardwalk Empire.
Ditto.
What a fantastic show. Came up in conversation at work the other day. We were talking about just how great that show is, and like all the people on that show. And it feels like everybody's gone on to like bigger, better things almost. Like Shea Wiggum is now like a pretty successful character actor, and that was like the first thing I'd ever seen him in. And yeah, I think, didn't we bring up Jack Houston somehow last week?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he's on that. He's excellent. Yeah,
he's fucking great. No, awesome show. I would definitely give that a rewatch at some point in the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, as far as show running Interview with the Vampire, we praise this show so much. We have a review on the channel now. We got together yesterday and we recorded a review of the original 1994 movie, and it's far less than equal sequel, Queen of the Damned. And, you know, a lot of your tickers were comparing characters and actors in that original 1994 movie to the characters and actors that we're looking at today. In terms of the casting, like, imagine telling somebody you're going to compare like the 30th most important person from Game of Thrones to Brad Pitt. You're going to compare I had never seen Sam Reed before, but we're going to compare him to Tom Cruise. We're going to compare Asad Zaman, another actor I've never seen before. We're going to compare him to Antonio Banderas, and we're going to be reveling in how great the unknowns are. And you know, again, one of the points I made yesterday was we're getting to see these characters expanded on thanks to the almost lost medium of television, episodic television.
Right.
And I think this happens for us, for me especially, because I've almost completely fallen out of episodic television. I feel like the only episodic TV I watch is with you when we pick a show to cover.
Right.
You know, Netflix, even like the Mike Flanagan shows that we love, Netflix dumps everything out. And you don't have to watch things episodically. You just binge them in one sitting.
Right.
Whether it's Yellow Jackets, whether it's this show, I love watching one episode a week and having it marinate and simmer in my brain until Sunday night rolls around. And it's weird because in the age of streaming, to watch a show when it's on, and I'm not going to lie, I did not watch this show at 9:00 last night, but I watched this show before I went to bed last night. I think I put it on around 10:15, and I think it had just finished airing when I put it on because I was able to fast forward. In fact, that brings me to like my only criticism of this entire show is the abruptness of the fucking commercials and the abruptness in which this episode in particular ended. It like ended mid-sentence.
I know, it's ridiculous. I 1,000% agree.
I rewound it on DirecTV Now or DirecTV Stream, whatever it's called. I rewound it like 4 times thinking, no, it must have cut off. And then I'm like, no, it didn't, because they're playing the credits. What?
Right.
It was bizarre.
I thought there was some kind of issue there too. And you're right with the commercials. There's these sort of jarring commercial breaks. And I think it's because the show is so deep and like so emotional. It's this like gothic romance. And then all of a sudden you get, you know, commercials for like Popeye's chicken and stuff just randomly. All of a sudden you're like, what the hell? But you brought up this really good point about Asad Zaman. You know, when they revealed that he was the vampire Armand at the end of season 1, and he starts floating up, I was like, this is going to be a little weird. And I didn't know who he was. I wasn't necessarily on board. I was like, they're really going to flesh out Armand. And now after this episode, I'm like, holy shit. Thank God they fleshed out Armand, because he is like such a complex character, such an interesting character. Asad Zaman, my wife was saying that like he might actually be the best looking one out of all these really good looking men that are on this show. And then one other thing that my wife said was, she's like, oh, they're really making Armand be like the mastermind this season. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think he kind of has like 2 roles. I think that he is sort of like almost like this pathetic kind of weak character that's like a rebound for Louis, right? But then I also think that he's like ancient and just inherently powerful. But I don't think of him as a mastermind. What about you?
I don't know, but there were at least 2 separate moments, maybe 3 in this episode where I like stopped and went, whoa. I think we're going to be in agreement. There's the scene in the museum looking at the painting where you're just like, wow. And like you said, I've never seen this guy before. I've never seen any, like I would maybe if I looked at IMDb and I noticed a movie or something that he's been in.
Right.
But he is the man in this episode.
Yep.
He has this other scene where he shuts down Santiago over the table, where, like you said, you get like a scope of his power.
Yeah.
And we mentioned this last week with last week's episode, how like it's hinted that he has these powers that go beyond even what Lestat was able to do.
Oh yeah.
The way he like stops time and can stop the movements of people around him, but let you, who he's focusing on, continue. You know,
right.
it reminds me of the scene in Days of Future Past where like Quicksilver, you know, is like, hold on. And then like, you know, he starts running and everything's slowly moving as he's just running around. Yeah. Except he can let other people experience that.
Yeah. Incredible stuff. That scene definitely made me kind of jump up in my seat. Very like really powerful stuff. And I think that, you know, you're saying that only he could do it. Lestat does kind of do some stuff like that. He did a scene. There was a part with like a poker game where he made everybody freeze in the first season too. But as we saw from last episode, Lestat learned these things from Armand. You can kind of like learn their gifts.
Oh, there's also just not even a scene, but those quick edits of Daniel taking notes, and he's having the vision of Armand in his mind, but like this close to the screen, with his like orange eyes and this like look of I don't even know, power. And it's that first moment is so jarring that it like scared me. I was like, because I wasn't sure if it was like a quick edit to a commercial or if that was and again I rewound it and I was like, whoa, okay. And that so happens throughout the episode.
Yeah. And so Sherry was saying to me, my wife, she was saying that like, oh, is Armand like kind of threatening Daniel in that moment? And I was like, yes, he is. But I think that those glimpses are actually from the past because Armand's hair looks different. I think that that's the scene in 1976. And we're going to see like a whole. Yeah. Go ahead.
Which I'm like crazy excited for next week's episode now because we're going to get. So now, let's not. I'll follow your tickers whenever you're ready to talk about that. We'll talk about that because that was very exciting that we're going to see that.
Yeah. Well, then let's go kind of like in chronological order for this episode. And you know, Armand is really showcased in this episode, but Claudia also is just as big a part, and it's really about her tragedy, right? We knew that she was going to be in this role that she was going to get sick of. But we get to see her perform it like all the way through one time. What do you think of that sequence where like she's in front of the screen interacting with it?
It's great. And I love that the irony that the more she falls out of caring about it, the more that the crowd loves it. And she becomes this like almost underground celebrity in France, in Paris, of like, oh, we have to go see the vampire show because of this amazing scene with this young actress. And she like by like the 400th time, she's like, and then I fell out the window. And the crowd is like, yeah, we love it. And they're like singing along, and it's just amazing.
Okay. Oh, we're back. You there, man?
Oh, I was talking that whole time. I don't know.
Oh shit, Armand froze us. No, you're talking about the irony, something about the irony with Claudia's performance.
It's funny because from my point of view, it was just you sitting there like this. And I was like, oh, he's totally engrossed in what I'm saying. Nope, he was frozen.
Go ahead, man.
Very quickly, all I said was I love the irony of the more she stops caring about it, the more that everyone in the crowd seems to love it, to the point where she's like, and then I fell out a window, and the crowd is singing along like, yeah. And, it's Delaney Hales, her and Assad Zaman. This was their episode.
Oh, hell yeah.
And I love her little scene with Santiago.
Mm-hmm.
I love that little scene where he, it's against the law to write a journal. Well, I'm just
Right.
writing my thoughts. And she goes to like burn it, and he pulls it out and
out of the rat box. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's snooping around, like we know from the dialogue things are going to come to a head. But then she has the other scenes with this woman on the side, and it leads me to think, and I don't know, but it leads me to think she's going to end up being that like mother figure that in the movie is killed with her.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is 100% the case. When we see their interactions, it's a different dynamic. In the 1994 movie, it's much more like a mother and a daughter. In this one, it is almost, it kind of borders on romantic. I know they don't want to like outright say it in a show.
That's exactly what I felt, where it was like, like she's making comments about how, when I fitted you for this dress 6 months ago, I expected you to grow. And and Claudia has a line about war, the war keeps you from growing. And you kind of get that this woman is like hinting that Claudia's a lot older than her appearance gives on, and there is this like hint of romance that obviously you have to play that very, very, you can't. Yeah, obviously the actress who plays Claudia is not 13 years old or 14 years old, but it's very hard to portray that on network TV, AMC.
Right.
If this was HBO, maybe they'd cross that line, but I don't think they're going to on this show. I think it's going to be more of like a mentor-ish relationship of like how to handle living in Paris and being miserable.
Yeah, well, even that character, and I wish I had written down her name. I wish I had written down the actress. Like, she goes into her own story too. We learn a lot. We get a lot of backstories in this episode. And she talks about how the reason why she is labeled as like a Nazi or collaborating with the Nazis is because she essentially just like slept with a soldier, like a German soldier, and that she like fell in love with him or whatever. That's the whole reason. She wasn't like a supporter or anything like that. And she uses very graphic language when she's talking to her. You said 6 months, but I think that like it might have been years actually. That
it could have. I also think that she kind of made it seem that she was sleeping with the Nazi as like a way of protecting herself. Like, oh, the Nazis aren't going to kill me if I'm putting out every night. If I'm like laying down and letting them go at me, they're not going to kill me. And right. I'll do what I have to do to survive. And I think that's a message that Claudia can kind of understand, being that she's in this position where she's forced to do this thing every night that she doesn't want to do. But she has to, because otherwise Armand can order for her to be, killed or kicked out of the Coven.
That's a good parallel right there. And that brings up a good point. Louis and Armand and Claudia are all kind of bound by the rules of this Coven. And we saw like not the ancient, but like the very old version of this Coven, which was like this sort of like religious Coven with like superstitious Coven. And it's turned into this vampire theater, but there's still like the same laws that are like almost like the 10 Commandments, but for vampires. And Armand and his followers adhere to them very strictly. And we know that this is going to lead to Claudia's demise down the road. Claudia has to kind of pay the price for not performing her best, giving her best performance, in her role. And so she has to wear the fucking little girl costume constantly throughout the episode, And Armand himself is bound by these laws. He's constantly freaking out about losing control over his Coven because he's choosing to go against the laws too, There's a really great fucking scene in this episode where essentially Louis on one side, Armand's next to him, and then the whole rest of the theater is on the other side. And they're talking about how like Louis reads books while they're doing the Black Sabbath, their performance, And they talk about how like, they broke this rule, they broke that rule. And Louis has an excuse for all of them. And Armand keeps defending him. And you could just feel that tension of like the vampires want to get rid of Louis so bad. And they're mad at Armand for not getting rid of him last episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you froze there. No, okay.
No, Armand.
No, that tension is so like I love the scene on the bench at the end of the episode where Louis is trying to. There's the two scenes. There's the one where like they're both like laying there shirtless, and he's like, Louis is telling him, you know, what are we? I keep thinking, I keep going to say Zaman instead of Armand. But Armand is basically like asking, "Oh, we are together, right?" And Louis is like, "Yeah, when we are, but I don't like to put labels on things." And
right,
and you can tell like Armand is way more into Louis than Louis. And then they have the scene on the bench at the end where Louis is trying to like counsel him into, why don't you let Santiago think he has some more power, and then watch him fail, and then they'll all come back to you.
Right.
And like you kind of get the idea that every single character feels trapped. Like Louis feels trapped because he's trapped by the secret of Lestat, where if Armand lets that slip, the Coven will kill him. Right. And so he can't just pick up and leave because they will chase them down.
Mm-hmm.
Armand is trapped because he's in love with Louis, and Louis is not yet there with him. And so he's stuck between a rock and a hard place between the Coven and with Louis.
Right.
Claudia is trapped because she wanted to be a part of the Coven so bad, but then she's stuck in this role that she has to play for years and years, trapped in this, young girl's body. Right. And and then the best part of it all is that you get these little glimpses of Lestat, who's not even there, who gets to kind of live outside of the trap. Oh, yeah. and then you could even add Malloy is trapped because he knows that these vampires have something on him. He can't just pick up and leave because they'll probably kill him. So everyone is some form of trapped by their situation. And it makes for a show where the acting is great, the tension is great. And it's just, it's an hour and 15 minutes every week that it's probably my favorite thing of the week that I watch.
Yes, 1,000% my favorite thing. I was so excited it was coming on last night. As you were talking about people being trapped, I was thinking about how there's a lot of like fire in this episode. Like Armand literally can manipulate fire, and he was, had a flaming hand last episode when he was supposed to kill Louis. In this, there's like multiple scenes where people light cigarettes, and it's funny because and there's also this line that I have as a ticker across there where like Louis goes fire after Daniel mentions the fire that eventually burns down the theater, right? It's almost like Louis doesn't know that a fire happened. And I think that fire in this show, especially in this last season, represents power, because we know that's one thing that can kill vampires. And the vampire, in the first episode of the season takes her own life. So she takes power into her own hands over like her misery and kills herself. In this, there's like there's a sequence where Armand lights a candle on their bed while they're talking in the very beginning. And I can't remember when fucking Lestat first shows up in this episode, but it's so fucking great because there's like a flame, and then Lestat just comes into the frame and lights a cigarette and starts smoking. I was like, oh, it's so good. I think it might be that sequence on the bed. Then there's this part with Louis and Lestat, or the idea of Lestat on a bench, and he starts talking to Armand, who shows up, and Armand lights the cigarettes with his like power. And there's so much like stuff that's not said, but it's just the imagery itself that's the storytelling. It's so good because
I love the whole little, like the tiny little moment about the suit. Like, why do you? I'm in your head, like you're envisioning me right now. Why this suit? And just Louis just like, because I loved you in that suit. And it's just like, it's such like a great little character line.
That scene is fucking fantastic. And I mean, there's so much imagery, and I want to talk about that dialogue right there and what ends up happening with that too. But like that sequence is so good. There's so much storytelling that's happening without any words. Like his like Armand lights Louis' cigarette that's in his mouth. He lights his own cigarette using his powers. And then also Louis takes his lighter and throws it. And like you might not even notice that when you're first watching it, but Louis essentially, like, after Armand lights a cigarette, he throws his lighter away. So that's like symbolic of, oh, I'm not going to need this lighter anymore because I'm going to be with you because you can do this for me. You can light my cigarettes for me. But that whole sequence with Lestat, this is kind of at the end of the episode where he shows up. It's pouring rain. Louis got an umbrella, but Lestat is not being touched by the rain because he's just in Louis' head, right? Then they're sitting next to each other on the bench, and then Louis closes the umbrella, and then Lestat gets wet with the rain, and he's wet with the rain. And then Lestat realizes that Louis is essentially, taking control of himself, and he's going away, and he just fades from existence. Powerful stuff.
Yeah. It just like it feels like we're kind of saying the same thing over and over again. It's like, let's talk about a scene and why it's the best fucking scene in the episode, and why the acting is the best fucking acting that we've seen. And if it feels repetitive, it's because it's just a great fucking show. And this episode might have been my favorite of the season, because it's like, as I'm like thinking back on the moments, it literally just goes from like you said, powerful moment to powerful moment. Armand giving his backstory with the painting. I've not seen myself in a painting for 400 years, getting that moment on the bench, getting the moments with Daniel, the moment with Claudia and the woman, and then that insane Delaney Hale's performance when she finds out from Armand.
That
Armand knows about them killing Lestat.
Yeah.
And she like confronts Louis about that. It was supposed to be you and me and you and me.
Right.
And then she's like, so I guess it's you and him and you.
Right.
And she's pissed at him. She hates, her current existence as, playing this young girl character in a show every single night, living that role, not able. She meets like this one friend, and then she's told by Armand she can't ever see her again.
Yeah.
And now she's like probably on top of all that, living in fear of
being destroyed.
By Armand, who's the most powerful vampire that they've probably ever met, not counting since Lestat. And it's just it felt like every major moment, that every time like the characters switched, something very important happened, something very powerful happened. There was something very emotional that took place. And it just, the hour and 15 minutes flies by. Like there are horror movies that are an hour and 15 minutes long that feel like they take 2 days when you're watching them. This flies by.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Really good point. AMC made Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. And one of the things that those shows did was they made every scene count, just like the last episode, where like every scene is almost like a little mini play unto itself. There's that great sequence where Armand does confront Claudia, and he's got her by the collar. It's this like threatening thing. It's maybe the most physically threatening Armand has ever been. And then it's fucking amazing because he lets her go. She runs away, and then he just goes down with his hand again, and he grabs Santiago, who was just like right there. That kind of made me laugh. But we have to talk
he has a great line to Santiago too, where he goes, "You're too old for Macbeth, but you're too young for Macbeth. You're too old for Hamlet, but you're too young for Polonius."
Yeah.
And in other words, like he died, he became a vampire at the wrong moment as an actor, and he stuck it like this age. And he says, like, "I'll bury you in the wall with your maker," and he's so threatening, and he's equal parts. You mentioned this earlier. He's equal parts threatening, menacing, and totally pathetic. at the same time.
Right. Exactly. And so let's talk about Ben Daniels and the threat, right? We know what the theater's like after watching the movie, after reading the book. We know what those vampires are like to Louis and Claudia. And we know that these vampires are leading up to that point too. We kind of have like this idea of, because of the vampire laws, they're a danger to Louis and Claudia. But then there's also just this personal animosity where like Ben Daniels hates the fucking part of the show that is devoted to Claudia. Like he talks about how annoying it is, right? In this episode. Then there's this we keep talking about these incredible scenes. The scene when Armand does shut them down in the restaurant, like we mentioned before, it's amazing. Like Ben Daniels, I don't know if that was just a recording of Jacob. What is Jacob Anderson, right? Is his name?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a recording of Jacob Anderson's voice that he's imitating, or if that's literally Ben Daniels doing an imitation of Jacob Anderson at that point. But like when he's mimicking Louis and he's saying the exact same things as him, that was so fucking good. Do you think it was real, or like he was doing an impersonation?
It's probably ADR, I'm assuming. But it wouldn't shock me if Ben Daniels was that good of as good of an actor as we think he is. We know he is, you know?
Exactly. And then he goes on to say, like, you don't have an accent from like a person from Chicago. You like stress the second syllable of every word or something like that.
And he says he's Cajun.
Right. He calls him out, and then like Louis just over on top of him, and he's acting kind of thuggish, and he like grabs his fucking tongue. You know, it's so great because like you don't have a lot of scenes where Louis acts like that, you know. So it's great to see that side of him too.
Yeah, it's another great moment in this episode. It just, there was no letdown depending on who was on screen.
Right. Every fucking scene is great. And then, like, you know, we should also fucking talk about Ben Daniels fucking flying up like Batman to the fucking Louis' apartment, right? I mean, that was great.
I love the whole thing with the photography, how Louis' like passion is photography, but he can't get good pictures because he's always taking pictures at night. And again, the like comical irony or the cosmic irony there. And Lestat in his head going, oh, who cares? It's 2 years of your life. What's 2 years? I did 2 years acting before I met Armand, you know? 2 years is nothing for us. We live forever. And
it's so great, though, because the show, like, they do their research and stuff. He like name drops all these photographers and artists and stuff when he's talking to Claudia. Then he goes and he talks to this, like, I guess, like this guy that runs an art exhibit or something like that. And they have this, like, real legitimate conversation. And then the guy basically tells him, you have the eye, but you don't necessarily have the ability to take the shots at the right time. And there's really excellent sequence where Lestat explains to him how he could take the shots. Like, you know, have a little patience, wait to take the shot, use the moonlight in this way, you know? And I love when Louis yells at that guy. His fangs pop out for a second, like, because he's mad. And then he's just like, fuck you. Like that before he walks out. I fucking love that. But, Danny, I think we should point out that Louis' photography does play a part in this mystery about what happened in 1976.
Or 1973. I mean,
they say 73.
I think they make it 73. Like he goes back and as he's scrolling through the videos or the recordings, he finds 1973.
Okay.
I think you're using 76 because that's the book timeline.
Book. Right. Good point. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, do you want to kind of just go on into why those photos kind of play a part in that?
I mean, I watched that whole last part 2 separate times, and I was a little confused by it. Only because I'm trying to put together the timeline and everything.
Yeah.
But I love like the hints. Like I like that they don't explain everything, and that like it makes me the preview for next week's episode is like has me so excited for what they're gonna do. But basically, there's photo evidence and apparently there's audio and visual evidence of Daniel and Louis potentially in a relationship in the 70s.
Right.
And from those intercut edits, it makes me think that Armand came back jealous and angry and like, you know, zapped Louis out of Daniel's mind and took Louis back and formed the relationship that they have now. But Armand is obviously also hiding things from Louis, as we saw in this week's episode with the fire comment, how Louis didn't know that the theater, the vampire went up in flames. That was something that was lost in his mind, and he's and it leads you to think that. So he gives Daniel a tape recorder, and he's like, "Just press play." And so now he's kind of like, "I don't trust Armand anymore. So here, Daniel, do what you want with this. Here, you can know the truth. I want to get to the bottom of this." And they're fighting now in the present at the end.
Right.
Yeah, it's I can't wait to see. They also make it seem like one of them like attacks Daniel, but Daniel's obviously not a vampire. So how is that the case? You know, what happens there? Obviously, maybe they bite him, but they don't kill him, and he doesn't drink any blood, so he doesn't become a vampire.
Right.
So we're gonna, and I love that, like, they hinted at Daniel's sexuality very early on.
Yeah.
And we kind of got the idea that Louis and Armand knew something because they would keep bringing up San Francisco. But now it's so much more obvious where they're going, and it's like crazy. I can't wait, because they also, the fact that like they tease Daniel about how he proposes to his wife and she said no, and he's pathetic and she never loved him, and so it's like, again, it comes back to that idea that like every character feels trapped and is everything that they do is trying to both survive another day and get out of their current situation.
Yes. And like kind of going back to what I was saying about fire before, Daniel is given a little bit of power himself because the Talamasca has hacked his computer. And like you said, he has this evidence about the fire that burned down the theater. And so he lets that slip during the interview. He's like, what about the fire? He says something about the fire to the two vampires. And then Louis is like, fire? Like he kind of doesn't remember, which kind of leads us to believe that like Armand has messed with Louis' mind, like you were saying. And then Armand gives him one of those flashes that kind of, you know, throws him off and makes him all shaky, like that he, you know, like back off, buddy. That's one of my favorite things about this show is that the vampires can like multitask. They can have conversations in the present, but then also do things with their mind too, or have side conversations.
It was like Lestat last episode where he's on stage singing and he's also at the exact same time having a telepathic conversation with Armand in the crowd.
Yeah, fantastic. It's one of my favorite parts of the show, actually. But like when they're talking about the fire, and then they also talk about these photos too. Like Louis notices in his portfolio that there are photos from other more talented photographers in his portfolio. And that's what makes him start to fight with Armand, because he's like, you planted these photos in here. So there's definitely the idea that like Armand is like trying to keep things under wraps, keep things, you know, quiet. And Daniel is getting this information from the Talamasca, and it's like kind of putting him in danger because he's essentially showing the vampires that he knows this extra stuff that the Talamasca knows. He goes through a list of like potential vampire victims that the Talamasca has documented. And he does find those photos that you mentioned before too of his experience. And then he actually literally has a fucking recording sample from when they recorded in 1973, like you said too. So like, that's one of the cool things about this show is that by having the interview take place in 1973, but then almost have like a follow-up interview now, you can do so much cool stuff with that, play around with that. But then also to have like it's done on a computer and someone can hack the computer and they can listen in and they can message you and stuff. It just adds all these complications to the story that aren't there. You know, it makes it more exciting.
Yeah. I don't know why this just popped into my head, but you started with like talking about the showrunner, and I think I had mentioned this to you last week about how I just noticed last week that in the opening credits, it's Interview with the Vampire Part 2.
Yeah.
And I love that idea that it's not season 2. It's like a brand new, it's almost like you're picking up a new book. And that leads me to think we could get so much great stuff in this series. We could get a Vampire Lestat season of this show. We can get a Queen of the Damned season of this show.
Yes.
And just hope that there are people watching TV and who still watch, shows on old-fashioned cable. Hi, Shar. Who love this show the way we do and who are watching it the way that we do. Like, we're getting some of our best viewership numbers for a YouTube channel that has 666 subscribers. We're getting some of our best viewership numbers. So we're not, obviously, we're not the best gauge, but I think, like, if that is anything, then that shows that there's people that are watching and that love it, and that this could continue for hopefully more seasons to come. Years to come.
Yeah, it makes me hope that they learn their lesson with Mayfair Witches too, and that they maybe have gotten like a new showrunner, new direction for the show. One last thing I wanted to bring up before we kind of wrap it all up. We've kind of like alluded to the scene with Armand in the museum when he's looking at the paintings, but we haven't really talked about the details of his origin. And I think that's really interesting. You were just talking about Queen of the Damned, the movie, and how kind of awful it is. And Marius is in that movie. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this. I think I just mentioned it, but I didn't like dwell on it in our discussion. But like they made it that Marius made Lestat in that movie, which is not true, right? It's this guy.
Yeah, you said it's Magnus.
Right. And they mentioned Magnus in this episode too. But I'm pretty sure that Marius is the one that made Armand, and they mentioned that in this episode. But there's a lot of details to it. It's not just like he meets Marius and Marius makes him into a vampire 1, 2, 3. It's like he has him as like a servant. He's used as like a prostitute for a while too. And then eventually, like he was like a slave essentially. His name has changed like 3 times from, he was like Arun, then he was Medeo, and that's when he was painted by Marius, and he's in this painting that they're literally looking at. And they eventually became Armand when he joined the Coven that he was in, So he's had this sort of tragic life that's led him to where he is now. And really just like surviving is what has made him this powerful. What do you think of his backstory?
I just incredibly powerful scene, exquisitely acted. It's one of those moments that when you're watching, even like late at night, you're watching and you're just, it's so rare for me to watch things in my house without my phone. It's so rare. And that's why I try to go to the movies as much as I do. Because it's literally the only place that I am guaranteed. Like I still, speaking of like rules that we follow, it's like the only place where I follow the rules, and I turn my phone off or I mute my phone, I put it away. And the only time I'll ever look at my phone in a movie is if I really have to go to the bathroom and I want to see how much longer is left in the movie. Or if I'm bored out of my mind and I want to see what time it is. Because I just Napoleon. During Napoleon, I looked at my phone in the movie theater because I was like, oh my God, how much more is this movie? But at home, even like a 90-minute movie can take me 4 hours because I'll start looking at, we'll be talking on Twitter, or I'll be posting something on Facebook, or I'll just be doom scrolling, and I'll fall down a rabbit hole of like YouTube videos. And this show is one of the few where I turn this and Mike Flanagan stuff, where the phone goes to the side and I just focus. And when you're really focused on these moments, like Armand's origin story, it just almost breaks you. Like you're just like you just completely get into everything, and like it's just a fascinating scene. And again, here's a character who in the movie with a much bigger name actor is probably in the movie for a total of 15 minutes. Probably not even when it comes to screen time. He's probably, the whole arc of the vampire theater is probably only 25 to 30 minutes of the 2-hour runtime. Right. And Armand only probably has a few scenes in the movie.
Yeah.
And for me to care this much about that character, given this performance and everything that we've seen of this character, is fascinating. It's great. Like they could do the Interview with the Vampire Part 4, Part 3, The Vampire Armand, which is another Anne Rice book. And if Asad Zaman is there, I'm gonna watch it.
Hell yeah. He fucking killed it this episode. I kind of regret not having him as the thumbnail. I have Claudia as the thumbnail for this one.
But, well, she's great. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know how many episodes are in the season?
So I think on IMDb it lists 15, and I think season one was 7, and I think there's 15 total. So I think there's 8 in this season.
Okay.
So I think we've officially reached the halfway point.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. There's a lot happening, and it looks like next week's episode is just like almost exclusively in the 70s. So
we'll see. I'm totally fine with dedicating an episode to that backstory, because that is something we haven't touched in 2 seasons, but has been hinted at since very, very early on. And so I'm excited to potentially see that.
Yeah. Oh, ditto, man. Yeah. Go ahead. No. So let's just awkwardly take turns. There we go. No, I mean, that's just it. This show's fucking great. We really love you guys watching, commenting. We've gotten a lot of new viewers because of this show. So thank you guys so much. We always do stuff on the side too. Danny's constantly putting up videos too. Do you want to kind of talk about what else is on the channel right now?
I mean, really, right now it's we have some apes and we have some vampires.
Still.
Yeah, like I said, we just reviewed the 1994 movie Interview with the Vampire and Queen of the Damned yesterday, so that's up on the channel now. We talked for over an hour about those 2 movies. In reality, we talked for about 45 minutes about Interview with the Vampire and about 18 minutes on Queen of the Damned.
Yeah.
But if you're a fan of this show, I would highly recommend watching that video, because we do a lot of comparing of the 94 movie, the actors, the characters, etc., to what is being presented here. We've reviewed the entire Planet of the Apes franchise going back to 1968 and all of the original sequels. We talked about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes when we were doing Apes Month in May. And really, this show has kind of taken over the channel from now, because I can't even think of anything else we're doing right now other than talking about these Anne Rice stories and this show. I know that I'm going to be trying to get to see In a Violent Nature, which is this new first-person perspective slasher movie. I've seen amazingly positive reviews, and I've also seen some rather negative ones. I'm really interested to see where I fall on this. There's oh my god, what else? There's a movie coming out this week.
The Watchers, right?
Oh, The Watchers, yes. Which is M. Night Shyamalan's daughter directing. and it's got a great cast. And
Yeah.
I've heard some pretty good advance word, so I'm gonna try to see that. But yeah, my mother's having ankle surgery on Wednesday, so maybe as like a tribute to bad ankles, I'll review Misery.
Okay, it's quite a segue there. Yeah. All right. No. If I can see a violent nature here in Austin, then we should talk about that too. Because usually Danny and I cover like Interview with the Vampire, and then we also do like a side thing too, like on Saturday. So this is going up on Tuesday. But we'll see what we got next for next week too. So we'll talk about that when we're done recording. But you guys make sure that you are subscribed, because we love hearing from y'all, and just thank you for watching too. And
do you know what we haven't even mentioned? And there's a weird connection. Ben Daniels, of course, was from the Exorcist series that we covered on Fox, which we loved. And Mike Flanagan, who we started this channel for, has just been named as the director of the next Exorcist movie, which is not following along the David Gordon Green Exorcist Believer.
Oh man.
Yeah, stop it. No, nobody on earth is saying that. But yeah, so we've talked about how there's at least one Mike Flanagan movie that we've never covered. I think it's Before I Wake, which is one of his movies that went straight to Netflix, I believe, back in like 2016, 2017.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We did talk about covering that too.
Yeah. So, I mean, this show and the other Interview with the Vampire stuff has really kind of taken over, which I'm fine with. But yeah, we always come up with more stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're called the fucking Lasser cast because it's based on the Lasser glass from Flanagan's Oculus, right? In case you guys didn't know that. So anytime there's a Flanagan thing, we have to always talk about that too. And it'd be cool if he kind of like gave us a little attention sometimes too. But anyway, we got to go. We'll talk to you guys real soon.